Yeah, afternoon everyone, and a very warm welcome to Sound and Music's first ever digital lunchtime masterclass series. My name is Heather and I'm creative project leader at Sound and Music. For those who don't know us, Sound and Music is the national organisation that supports the creation and enjoyment of new music. And this masterclass is part of an annual summer school which we have been running for over 10 years now for young people aged 14 to 18 who want to explore composing and creating their own music. Obviously things this year have turned out a little differently, so we've moved everything online and also decided to create some new opportunities to reach and hopefully inspire even more young people, those who might already be creating their own music, and those who want to explore something new, and those who might never have tried before. So our masterclasses are aimed to provide all of those things and introduce you to a creative industry expert who will give you a taster on how they approach creating music. Today's session is in two parts and it's led by two artists from Sound and Music's New Voices programme. New Voices is an artist development programme that supports composers at pivotal stages of their career to explore new ideas, new sounds and new music. In the first hour, we'll be joined by pianist and composer David Austin Gray, who will be exploring different ways of generating and developing new ideas and discussing how to write for live ensembles, as well as for film, dance and other mediums. And in the second hour, we'll then be joined by Mella Faye, who is an actor, musician and director, who will lead a session on how to get inspired, build confidence and develop your creativity. So before I hand over to David, just a note on questions. During David's session, we'll respond to questions at intervals throughout. So please feel free to ping over any questions you have using the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. But that's enough for me. I'm delighted to introduce you to David Austin Gray, who will be discussing a couple of his most recent projects.
Cool. Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here, really pleased to be able to share some music and share some ideas with you. So thanks for tuning in, and yeah, really hope you enjoy the session. And there's obviously a lot of other great sessions throughout the week as well from Sound and Music. So yeah, you kind of definitely in for a real treat with all the different people that they've got lined up for you. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here. As Heather said, I'm a composer, pianist and educator. I work in a variety of different projects, different mediums as well. My background is kind of primarily from a jazz background. So I play a lot of improvised music, write for my own jazz group called Hansutori, and also sort of work and collaborate and tour with other musicians as well, playing live gigs and doing studio sessions and things like that. Today I'm kind of wanting to talk to you about two different pieces that I've been working on, one of which is a recent piece. The first one I'm going to show you actually, and we'll kind of discuss. It's a piece called Overseas and Out of Reach, and it was a commission. Basically, I was commissioned by a Birmingham-based organisation called Around the Houses, to write a piece of music, and the brief was very minimal. There wasn't any sort of prescription about exactly how I should write it or what the lineup should be or anything, or the type of music or anything like that. It was just an opportunity to write some new music during a period of time when obviously everyone isn't able to connect and see people in the same way that they usually are. And in fact, this hasn't actually been released yet, so you're kind of like getting the world premiere, so to speak, because it hasn't actually been released online, but it will be released in a couple of weeks. It's an audiovisual piece, and I've collaborated with two other musicians, a musician called Michael Fletcher, who's a woodwind instrumentalist, so a flautist, saxophonist, clarinet, etc. So he's playing clarinet and flute for me on this piece, and he's based in Almira in Spain. And then David Duffy, who's a musician that I worked with on a residency a couple of years ago, who's a Irish bass player and composer. who's also based in Spain, actually. He also lives in Barcelona. And part of the reason why I chose to work with those two people was the fact that they weren't on my doorstep, so to speak. Because I had this opportunity to write some music and to be able to collaborate with people, but I wasn't able to physically be in the same room as them. I thought, why not take the opportunity to create some music with people that I wouldn't necessarily normally have the opportunity to work with. So I didn't want to kind of work with local musicians specifically on this particular project. So I thought I can do that, you know, in a couple of months or whatever, when you know, when things allow and the opportunity is there, I can kind of meet up with my friends, meet up with musicians in this country and record and play together. But I thought I'll try and work with people overseas, hence the title of the piece, basically. So yeah, there's a score which I think has been sent out. Is that right, Heather?
Yeah, it's been emailed to you guys, so you should receive links to both scores that David's going to talk about today in your email. So if you'd like to follow along, yeah, you can.
Sure. Thanks. Sorry, lost you a bit. So yeah, there's and I'll talk a little bit more about it. It's basically written in two sections. So there's an introduction section which is very free, and it's only consists of if you've got the score in front of you, you can see that there's basically a series of notes. I've got a paper version here, just might be easier for reference. So it's basically this top line. It's just I think it's about 12 notes or something like that on that top line, and there's no instruction about how to play those notes in terms of the length or necessarily the order or repetition or anything like that. The dynamics, the phrasing, it's all deliberately left very open because I wanted to give, you know, two musicians freedom to be able to kind of approach that and interpret that in whatever way they felt was appropriate. And the idea with the composition was that we'd all record our separate parts, and then they would all be sent to me, and I would kind of manipulate them and put them together and try and create some sort of coherent piece of music or experimental music out of that, basically. So I deliberately didn't want to tell them too much about how they should do things. I wanted to see what would happen when I gave different people the same information and see what came back, basically, which is I think is a really interesting point, and it's kind of relevant not only to composition but to improvisation as well. For those of you that play in bands, or those of you that play jazz, or you play in a group or anything like that, it's essentially the same thing where every musician is given the same information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to treat the music in the same way. And that's the beauty of collaborating and working with other people, is that you have this array of ideas, just even from a very simple small idea you can generate a lot of music. So that's definitely something to bear in mind for those of you that are writing music and playing in bands and things like that. So yeah, but I'll play the video because I'm conscious that I don't want to waffle too much. I think that when you hear it and see it, then maybe you'll have a bit more insight about what's happening, and you might have some questions about how it all came together as well. And there might be things in there that you like, there might be things in there that you don't like, or you don't sit well with you or something. And those are all also really interesting points for discussion and things to kind of be aware of when you're thinking about writing your own music and playing in your own bands and stuff like that as well. So yeah, this is Overseas and Out of Reach, and it's about 4 minutes long. Hope you enjoy. I'm gonna see if I can get this to work first time. Okay. And share. Okay.
We are not alone. We are all interconnected. around human connection. Human connection. Human connection.
Cool. Cool. Was that all good, Heather? Did you...
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, David. I've got a few questions myself. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So I'll start off with just a question. I just wondered how you go about. You spoke a little bit about how you chose the kind of collaborators that you wanted to work with, but I suppose it would be interesting to know more about how you kind of chose your collaborators and what it is you actually asked them to do when you were sort of approaching them.
I think it was for like a variety of reasons. With Dave Duffy, who's the bass player that you see in the video, we'd wanted to work together for a long time. I mean, we'd done a residency together, but after that was the first time we'd met. And after that, we wanted to collaborate together for a long time, but we'd never had the opportunity to do so. And actually, we'd planned to get together. I was going to travel to Barcelona, and we were going to spend a few days working on some music. And actually, that happened just as everything kind of happened with the global pandemic. And so obviously, travel and all that sort of stuff was like kind of just written off completely. So that kind of cancelled the plans. So part of the reason for taking the opportunity to work with him was because we'd already planned to work together and it had been cancelled, and this opportunity, this commission came up, and I thought, oh, this is a great way to at least in the meantime be able to still make music with someone that I wanted to kind of connect with and collaborate with, even if we can't do it in the same room and we can't be in the same place. We can at least kind of share ideas digitally and work sort of via the internet and stuff like that. Dave, both Dave and Mike are very similar to myself, very kind of multidisciplinary. So we both kind of we all work in slightly different areas, but not just restricted to one type of music. So because I didn't know exactly how this piece was going to turn out, I wanted it to be as open as possible, and I was deliberately not very prescriptive about what I wanted, because I wanted to see the possibilities and the potential of different people sending back audio and not having like an idea of exactly how it was going to work. We kind of discussed over the phone what I had in my head and some ideas, but it wasn't until I actually received the files back that I actually had stuff to work with. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I can put this here, and maybe this can work in a certain way. And there was a lot of experimentation, and it's definitely very different from how I initially envisioned it, basically. With Mike, who's playing flute and clarinet, I knew that he played multiple instruments, and I didn't prescribe what he should play. So he asked me, he's like, oh, do you want saxophone or flute or clarinet on this, and he had certain instruments available to him at the moment, because he didn't have all of his instruments where he is in Spain, but he had a bunch of them. And I said, you know, I'll leave it with you. Like, I kind of said, you know, obviously I'm a big lover of flute, so whenever I can include a flute in anything, I always kind of jump at the opportunity. But I also said, you know, if you hear something else, or, you know, just try different things. So he sent me a few different recordings. Some of it was playing the melody that I'd written, which is in the score, the top line of the score. And some of it, well, as you can hear in the recording, there was a lot of improvisation as well with the flute. So Mike actually improvised that flute part, and then it kind of fitted over the harmonic movement that myself and Dave were creating as well. So yeah.
Cool. Well, that's leads on nicely to some of the questions that are in the Q&A box at the moment. So we've got a question that says, if all the instruments were recorded independently without hearing the others, how much editing and arranging did you do?
Great question. It was, there was a lot of editing, but the editing was more creative editing rather than necessarily having to like line things up. Because the way that the score is written, the first section, because there's no tempo, it allows for a variety of different like approaches to that. So I knew that even though I didn't know exactly what I was going to get back with the audio, I knew that necessarily it would work. It wouldn't be like horribly discordant and clashy because of the notes that I'd chosen in that 12-note sequence, basically. So they all kind of form part of a scale, essentially. And I knew that there would be like different overlaps at different times depending on what everybody played. But I wasn't worried that it might somehow turn out disastrously, because I knew that I had a rough idea of the sonic palette that was going to sort of emerge as a result of those things kind of overlapping. The second section was at tempo. And in fact, yeah, sorry, I should explain as well, because I'm obviously, it's very familiar for me, but I appreciate for everyone else, you've just heard, first time you've heard it and you're not necessarily sure about how the process works. So I'll explain. What I did was I sent the score, and then I recorded a version of the second part of the piece, so essentially the theme, which is at tempo. So I recorded that to a click track, and then I sent that to both Dave and Mike, but I didn't send Dave or Mike each of their respective parts. So Mike had no idea what Dave was going to play, Dave had no idea what Mike was going to play, and I had no idea what either of them were going to play, but they could hear my piano reference part. So they were able to hear the timing and the tempo and the click track of the second part, which is at tempo, and they use that as a reference to play over. But the first part was obviously really open, and then there was a lot of layering. You can hear the strings as well. There's like a lot of harmony in the strings, but obviously Dave's only one double bass player, so he only played one line on the double bass, but I kind of stacked a lot of those layers to create some harmonies and some tension and release and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And then another, leading on nicely to another question, what made you only want a certain number of instruments? What made you pick them, and which part is your favorite? So there's a couple of questions there, but yeah, all nicely related.
It was partly logistical, actually, and partly just a gut feeling thing. So I love like writing for like all sorts of types of combinations of instrument. I love writing solo piano pieces. I like to work in duos. I think that's really exciting when you work in a duo. I think there's a lot of freedom. Obviously from like a jazz perspective, it's always really fun to play in a trio or a quartet, quintet, something like that. And more recently, I've been trying to experiment with writing for larger ensembles, so 8 and 9 piece ensembles. For this particular project, whilst there wasn't any prescription about who I would work with or what the type of music would be or anything like that, there was like a budget basically to write the music, and there was a budget to incorporate other musicians, and that only stretched to a maximum of being able to work with 2 other musicians, basically. So that kind of dictate me, you know, if I wanted to work with, say, 6 other musicians, there just wasn't a budget for that in this particular instance, basically. But there was budget to work with 2 other, well, I say musicians, it was 2 other people. So initially I wasn't sure whether I was going to work with a dancer or something like that. I had different ideas in my head, and then eventually I settled on this idea of collaborating with Dave and Mike and wanting to work with musicians in different countries. And as for, what's my favorite part? I think I just love the way that it all comes together. I love both of those musicians for different reasons, and it's always a pleasure to be able to like listen to them and work with them. So I was really happy with what they sent back. Obviously, it's beautiful to hear flute, and Mike's flute solo was really, really warmed my heart when I heard it for the first time. I was really excited to be able to see how I could fit it in. And similarly, what Dave was doing with his electronics and effects was really interesting and gave me like a lot of room for creativity and experimentation. Yeah.
Cool, that's a great answer, and also leads on to a question that Katrina has asked, which you've kind of answered in part about as part of the commission, did you know in advance how many collaborators there would be? But the other part of her question is, did you apply for the commission, or was it an offer to you? Which is a great question. And what was the timeline for working on the piece?
Yeah, great question. It was offered to me, so it wasn't anything that I'd applied for. How it came about was that the organisers of the commission, so this group, it's Around the Houses, which is a group made up of a couple of Midlands-based musicians and promoters. So Tony Dudley Evans, who's a programmer and promoter, as well as Alex Woods, who's a saxophonist and musician and curator, and Sam Slater, who owns a record label here in Birmingham. So that's essentially the group that put together these commissions. I think there were 4 commissions in total, so they haven't been released yet, but they will be released, I think, later on this month digitally. So you'll be able to see those and see the other ones if people are interested. So they had initially asked me about doing like a live gig, like a live stream, but they'd done a series of live streams before, and I think that they were conscious that they wanted to try and move away from that, because obviously we're in this period now where live streaming gigs has become so abundant that they just want to try and do something different, basically, and just break away from that model and experiment with maybe offering commissions for like composed work rather than things which are necessarily live. So that's how it came about, and they simply asked me if I wanted to write a piece of music. The time frame was not very long, actually. It was a couple of weeks, and in classic fashion, I left mine until the very last week to actually get it done. So yeah, it's quite tight on time, but Dave and Mike were really really kind of great with getting stuff over to me, and yeah, I had a lot of fun putting everything together. So yeah.
Great, thanks, David. Shall we move on to your second project now?
Yes, let's move on. One thing that I will mention as well, about which is kind of relevant to the piece we just listened to, as well as the piece we're going to listen to, is that as part of my New Voices period with Sound and Music, there was a mentorship program as well, and I was able to collaborate with a musician, Dave Douglas, who's a trumpet player and composer based in New York. And I highly recommend that everyone checks out his music, because he's really, really exciting composer, really nice guy, and very, very interesting work in a lot of different mediums and for a lot of different combinations of instruments. So definitely check out his work if you're interested, especially if you're coming from any sort of jazz, experimental or improvised music background as well. But anyway, I had a couple of sessions with Dave, and one of the things that we talked about was this idea of the less prescriptive you are, the better in the majority of cases. And he played me some music that he'd written and recently recorded. And he showed me a score of it whilst we were listening to the music. And I was kind of really confused to begin with, and in some ways blown away, because the score was so minimal and so simple, and yet what I was hearing sounded so orchestrated and rich and complex. And he kind of said that often he finds that when you give less instruction, you leave more open to the interpretation of the individual musicians, that often generates the best results. And that's something that I kind of do agree with as well, to a large part. Obviously, you want to have your voice as a composer, and you want to write things in a way that resonates with you, but I think it's really important to be open to what other people might come back with in terms of an interpretation of your music. And I think that often the best idea for the music is the one that serves the overall composition the best. It doesn't necessarily matter who comes up with that idea, whether it's the composer, the drummer, the bass player, the singer, whoever. I think that the best idea is the best idea. And I think that as a composer, often it's like your skill is to take that on board and really be conscious that how can I get the most out of this music, and is there something that I haven't thought about that somebody else has got a different viewpoint on. And that was something that we discussed a lot, like myself and Dave Douglas. So yeah, when we come onto this next piece, which is a piece that I wrote for my jazz group, Hansutori, I think that's also worth bearing in mind, because I've presented the musicians with a score and we rehearsed it and we talked about ideas of playing it, but obviously everyone is an individual and everyone's bringing their own sort of individual kind of approach to the music, and I think that always creates something really, really exciting. So, cool. So this is a piece called All Better, All Better, and it's from a project that I did a few years back called Wolves Are People Too, which was a collaboration, a kind of quite a strange piece, which was basically my band, a 6-piece ensemble, collaborating with 5 dancers from Birmingham Royal Ballet. I work with a friend of mine, a choreographer who choreographs and dances for Birmingham Royal Ballet, called Kit Holder. So he created this dance piece and I created the music. We put it together, and there was also some live illustration from a guy called Nick Robertson, and it was all based on this Japanese anime film called Wolf Children. So yeah, definitely check that out. If you're into anime, if you're into Japanese films, anything like that, it's a beautiful film, Wolf Children. But I wrote this music kind of inspired by that, the story of that. It's a story of a mother raising her 2 children, and they're half wolf, half human, basically. And it's, yeah, this piece, it's kind of like in an AAB form. So you've got like the A section, like a main melody. It's quite traditional as in comparison to the other piece. I'd say it's quite a traditional jazz format. You've got the melody, and then that A section is repeated again, and then there's a B section which is a bit different, moves away, slightly different kind of territory. But yeah, I'll play it for you, and then we can kind of maybe have a look at the score, and we can talk a little bit about the orchestration and about what happened with the band playing it and stuff like that. So yeah, this is All Better, All Better. Let me do a screen share.
That was great. Thanks, David. It's really nice to listen to that in full. I suppose I'm just wondering a little bit about, you mentioned that in addition to like the music, there was also this dance and illustration element to the
Hmm.
show. And I suppose I'm just quite interested to know like how the difference between performing this as just a purely musical piece and then um, kind of compared with performing it in like a different setting where there's different things like dance and
Hmm.
like you mentioned illustration things going on, and how that kind of influences how the piece sounds and kind of what decisions you make when you're composing and improvising.
Yeah, for sure. It's a really interesting question. It was really challenging and eye-opening actually working with the dancers, and there's a lot of challenges which you perhaps necessarily just working purely on a musical side of things you don't necessarily have to think of, and then working with dancers you're suddenly presented with these kind of problems and troubleshooting and challenges and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of difference between playing it as in a live band in like a gig situation compared to playing it as part of like a show with dance and everything. um I suppose like the one of the main considerations initially that when you work, especially with dance, that you're always going to come up against is to do with speed and tempo. Um, so uh, there were certain pieces that we would ideally maybe have played them slightly quicker tempo, but they didn't necessarily work with the choreography of the dance. So we had to kind of slow the whole piece down. And what we did as well, but Kit was quite clever. Kit's the choreographer, and me and Kit came up with this system where we built in kind of I don't know what to call them, but like kind of like safety nets basically. So there were bits in both in the music and the choreography whereby if something needed to continue or happen for longer than anticipated, we were able to do that without it kind of just completely breaking down and ruining the whole flow of the piece. So for example, in the musical side of things, there might be like a vamp that can be repeated like indefinitely, and then there's just a cue, whether it's a cue from a musician or it's a cue from one of the dancers, that we move on to the next section. So in that way there's not this kind of panic whereby perhaps the music has arrived at a certain place for the dance or vice versa. So we built in these kind of like safety nets, and similarly with the choreography, Kit built in sequences of movements whereby they could be extended or repeated, and it didn't affect the overall shape of the choreography. So it kind of allowed some breathing room, but it was quite difficult because you playing with the band, playing with the dancers, you had to be very aware of what was happening physically with the movement on stage. Normally in a band situation, you don't really have to pay that much visual attention to what's going on. I mean, you need to be able to see for cues from other musicians and things like that, but essentially you can kind of close your eyes for the whole thing and use your ears and just play basically. But obviously with the dancers, it was kind of having one eye on the band and one eye on the score, and then like a third eye somewhere on a on the dancers, trying to like make sure that everything syncs up. So it was definitely a bit of a challenge, but I think it also opened up my sort of mind to different ways of thinking about how the music can operate as well. And it was really fun experimenting with changing the tempo of things and changing the intensity, and even things as drastic as like rewriting scores and rewriting tunes. Like we would chop a whole section and simply just move it so like the A section would become the B section, or the ending would become the start of the piece and things like that. So it was quite interesting being able to be that ruthless and that drastic with the material in order to make something which worked together as a whole thing involving illustration and dance and music. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like actually leads on to my next question about how do you balance I mean, what's the balance like in terms of what's on the page, what's on the score that we can see, and what we're actually like hearing in the music? And I suppose like the balance between the composition and the improvised aspects is something that would like to know more about.
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to the thing I was saying before about what Dave Douglas has said about being as not being as very prescriptive and leaving room for people to be creative and interpret the material. Essentially, certainly with this piece, everyone's following the form of the score, so nothing changes with regards to like the form and the amount of bars and the measures and things like that. But what is being played around with is like the way the rhythm is being broken up, like how you feel the time. So it's written in 3/4. Let me see if I can get the screen share the score. Desktop share. Okay. Okay. So yeah, Heather, can you see the score there?
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks, David.
Okay. So yeah, it's in 3/4 time, as you can see here. But as you can see, perhaps here as an example, there's like this kind of 4/3, so it's like 4 even quavers over the 3, and then in the bass as well, you can see here you've got 2 dotted crotchets, which also equal to 3 beats in the bar. So you've got kind of this idea of 2 against 3 against 4, and that's something that's really fun to play around with, especially in a band situation. Again, you can see here in this B section, there's like this pedal that's just repeated all the way through it rhythmically. It's just this dotted crotchet thing, and this basically becomes like it kind of generates like its own separate rhythm against the pulse of the 3/4 beat. So to try and give you an example, yeah, I've got my piano here. So you've got this repeated note, which is a D, and you've got these moving chords at the bottom. So you could kind of hear that as being in 4. You could kind of count 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's written in 3, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So yeah, if that kind of makes sense, let me yeah, so yeah, that's the sort of thing whereby everyone in the band has kind of got that information in front of them in the score, but everyone can kind of choose how they treat that information. So you can hear the drummers doing a lot of stuff where he's playing against the beat, and you can hear the horns, the 2 saxophone players, they often pick up on the phrases in the melody, even when they're improvising, or even when one of them's improvising, you can hear the other one maybe playing this repeated figure in the background, basically. So yeah, does that answer the questions at all?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm gonna open the chat box now and look at some of the questions there. Sure. So okay, this is a question. What made you come up with the cool and interesting rhythm in this piece? Did anyone inspire you? I love it, is the follow-up comment there. So some good feedback.
Thank you so much. I think it's just that I really love triple time. I really love things that are written in 3/4 or 6/8, because I feel like there's a lot of it just gives you so much room to be able to play different things within that, as we were just talking about, like the 4/3 and the 2/3 and stuff like that. I don't think there was any one person in particular that necessarily inspired this particular piece, but I think that this type of music definitely, I'm really inspired by musicians such as Brian Blade, who's an American drummer and composer. He tends to write a lot of music with really rich harmony and lots of really interesting rhythmic things going on. And there's also a American trumpet player called Ambrose Akimusire, who again I'm really big fan of his style of writing. Basically, he's kind of very open, so he's kind of writes very strong melodies, rhythmic and melodic melodies, but then the way the band treats the music is really open, and they tend to stretch it and take it to extremes. So I really like people that kind of write strong, kind of like relatable music, but then the band, the performance of it is actually kind of very drastic from what's written. I like this idea of kind of stretching and moving away from the initial idea of the piece, and then maybe returning to it at some point, just to see how far you can get away from the original idea, basically. Yeah.
Cool. We've got another message from Catriona that says, "Hi, I really like the music and was wondering how long did it take before you decided that you were happy with the finished product?"
That's a great question. I think it's one that all composers like struggle with as well. I think I was, oh, I don't know, it's a tricky one. I think I'd say I was happy with the music at the point where I took it to the band and we played it and we rehearsed it and played around with it, and to the point where it had been reshaped from what I'd originally written. I think that was when I was happy with it. I think I wrote it, especially whenever I write for Hansutori, I always write in the knowledge that what's on the page is never going to be what we end up with on the stage or in the studio or something like that. So I wrote it knowing that my ideas would probably be changed and someone would come with some better ideas, and we'd mess around with the melody, we'd mess around with the time and the form and things like that. So I think I was happy at the point when we'd had a few rehearsals of the music and we gigged it maybe once or twice, and we really felt comfortable that we knew enough about the music that we could move away from the score. I think that's always a good test, actually, especially playing in a jazz band. I think if you can get to the point where you're not relying on the score and you feel comfortable enough that you know enough of the material and it's like inside your head, that you're not having to like rely on it, that you could potentially just lose the score altogether, turn it over, or just play without the score, and then you're able to more directly interact with the people in the room and the environment and just play, see what happens on the night, on, you know, and rather than necessarily following the music. So I think I was happy with it when we got to that point of familiarity, basically being a bit more comfortable with it. Yeah.
Cool. I've got a technical question here from Edith. What music notation software do you use?
Hey Edith, I use Sibelius. Yeah, it's quite a popular notation software, and it took me like a little bit of time to kind of get used to it, but once you kind of fiddle around with it for a bit, you find that I think it's quite useful for writing, scoring things out, and you can transpose things in there quite easily, and it gives you a lot of options to like lay things out in a way which makes sense to you, which I think is great, because obviously everybody's scores are different. Everyone likes to include more or less information on the page and stuff. So, but yeah, Sibelius, definitely check it out. Super useful program.
Sorry, I'm muted. Cool. Another question. How do you think it's best to translate ideas from your head to the page? You've spoken a bit about that, but yeah, I suppose that's the golden question, isn't it, for all composers and artists?
Yeah, it's so hard. Like, there's so many times when I have an idea in my head and then I go down to write it, and then what I've ended up with is nothing like what I really had in my head. But I think that part of, for me anyway, I think what's important is having that acceptance and openness that what you come up with is like sincere, I guess, like that. So it might not necessarily be what your initial idea and what you end up with might be quite different, but as long as throughout that process of trying to get something out of your head and onto the page or onto the stage or whatever, as long as there's like sincerity and in that, I think that's what's important. And I think that often, if I can, certainly from my experience, like a lot of my best, what I feel as though like my best ideas or best compositions have come about via accident, via mistake. Like I've had an idea in my head, and I'm a pianist, so usually my first port of call is to sit down at the piano and try and work things out there. And I'll play something and I'll just slip, I don't know, or I'll just play the wrong chord or the wrong note or something. And then in, 50% of the cases, that will actually sound better than what I'd originally planned to do anyway. So I'll make a mistake and be like, oh, sounds great, actually. I'll keep that in and then build from there. And I think it's just trying to take these little ideas and see and develop them and see how you can stretch them, basically. Yeah.
Cool. I've got a couple of questions that are quite similar now. I've got one from Anthony that says, when composing your music, were you inspired by a specific composer? I think that was in relation to the first project you shared, but I suppose you have already discussed sort of some of your influences as well. But yeah, if there's anyone else that you'd like to share, and also what projects and collaborations do you have planned for the future?
Okay. I mean, there's so many different composers that inspire me, and I think that what happens is that you listen to music and then it kind of just seeps into your subconscious, and you end up writing stuff, and you might not even know where you first heard a certain idea or had a certain kind of like sound in your head, but it just all starts to creep into your music, and then you find things that you like and you sort of develop your own kind of tastes and voice as well. But I mean, in relation to the first piece, I guess I was thinking more along the lines of like sort of like ambient and modern sort of contemporary classical minimalist kind of music. So definitely like Steve Reich, Max Richter, people like that, Juliana Barwick. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking of those people when I was writing the piece, but like those types of composers definitely do kind of influence my writing style when I'm thinking about writing something with like a more like minimal kind of like setup. So in this case, obviously it was piano and double bass, and I knew that electronics were going to be involved, and I knew it was going to be quite ambient. So I guess I was trying to channel some of that sound basically of those kind of like contemporary composers. Yeah. What's the question about?
Yeah, about if you've got any projects or collaborations lined up, or if there's anyone that you're really eager to collaborate with in the future.
Always. At the moment I'm working on a track which I'm hoping to release soon, basically, with an MC, a hip hop artist called Chima Anya. So I'm producing like a hip hop track, and he's recorded some vocals for me, and I'm putting that together. And yeah, that's quite fun because it's a bit of a departure from what I've been doing like recently. So something a bit different. But yeah, over this kind of quarantine period, I've really been getting into like a lot of production and electronic music. So yeah, I've got a couple of electronic tracks coming out, and this track with Chima Anya called Brighter Days, which should be coming out quite soon. I also recorded some music for some piano for a singer called Freya Roy, who's like an R&B and a soul singer, jazz singer. It was really cool. She's got a really nice style. So she's got some new music coming out. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but she does have some music out already as well. So we did a tour with her last year of her debut album. So you can find that on like Spotify and stuff like that. I didn't play on the album, but I played on the tour. But it's a great album. You can check it out. It's really nice. That's Freya Roy. And then in the future, there's so many people I want to collaborate with. I'd love to work with Laura Mvula. Like that would be like great. There's a rapper called Kofi Stone that I'd love to kind of collaborate with at some point. Like a lot of people. Like there's a few dance companies as well, that I'd like to work with as well. There's dance company called Ballet Black that I'd love to write some music for. And yeah, I'm always open to working and collaborating. It's one of the most fun parts of being a musician. So yeah, it's all good.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I think we'll end things there. But that was great, David. Thank you so much. It's great to hear you talk about those two projects and also your influences and sort of stuff you have planned in the future. So thanks, David. We're going to head into Mella's session, and we're just going to take a 2-minute break just to hand over to Mella and allow anyone new to join us. So for those that are staying on, please take a quick comfort break, and we'll see you back here in about 2 minutes.
Okay,
cool.
Thanks so much, Eva. Really
Thanks, David.
It. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry if this is a repeat to those of you who are joining from the first session. But once again, a very warm welcome to Sound and Music's first ever digital lunchtime masterclasses. My name is Ayşe, and I'm the education coordinator at Sound and Music. Sound and Music is a national organization that supports the creation and enjoyment of new music. This masterclass is part of our annual summer school, which we have been running for over 10 years for young people aged 14 to 18 who want to explore composing and creating their own music. So this masterclasses are aimed to introduce you to a creative and industry expert who will give you a taster of how they approach creating music. As you might already know if you're carrying on from the first half, today's masterclasses is a special New Voices artist session, as my colleague Heather mentioned. And for those of you who are not familiar, New Voices is Sound and Music's artist development program that support composers at pivotal stages of their careers to explore new ideas, new sounds, and new music. So in this second half, we're joined by the New Voices artist, musician and director, theatre company founder, Mella Faye. And she's going to talk for around 45 minutes, and then we're going to answer questions from the Q&A. This will be a bit different to how David ran his sessions. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to type it to the Q&A box, and we will pick them up at the end of the session. And if you find that the connection is unstable or you're having issues, you feel free to switch off the video, and then it might hopefully improve with the quality. But that's enough from me now, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Mella Faye.
Thanks, Ayşe. Hello, everyone. Hi. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this session. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and my practice and share with you some of the things that I find helpful or things that I'm in the process of learning in my quest to be a better artist. But before I get stuck in, I'm going to play you a little bit of rehearsal footage that we're currently working on to give you a flavour of what I do and what my company is about. So I'm just going to share screen now.
Call me out from your silence. Tell me you can hear me. Call me out from the darkness. Don't leave this world without me. Run, I will run for you. We could leave the world behind before the dawn breaks through.
Let's just check we're off share here. Great. So I began writing songs and poetry when I was really little, and at the age of about 15 I had a ropey old guitar with a missing top E string, and I played at home and I played on the street, And I stole lyrics from existing songs and gave them new tunes, and I stole existing tunes and gave them new lyrics. And when I was about 21, I formed a 10-piece band, and we toured the songs that I'd written around the country for about 3 years. And then I took about 12 years out to make some money and start a family. And during that time, I became more and more interested and involved in theatre. And then in 2016, I got together with a couple of my best mates who are musicians too, and we started a new project, a band, with the intention of making shows that would belong on theatre stages, shows that had stories delivered by a live band. And that's my current outfit, Pecho Mama, who you just seen some rehearsal footage from. The makeup of the band is Sam on electric drum kit, and Alex on synthesizers and Soundgarden, and me on synths and affected and looped vocals. And we tell big stories using pre-recorded voice artists, guest actors, guest directors, intricate sound design, and always with the band driving the atmosphere and the action. And so the show that you've just seen, we're currently creating, is called Oedipus Electronica, and it's a retelling of an ancient myth, but set in present-day London. And we're working with choreographers, guest director, actors who can sing, and the process of making a show for us is between 1 and 3 years, and the first draft of this show will be out in the world from next April. So whilst we're making a show, we work on the numbers simultaneously with the story development, and we put all the numbers, because sometimes it's colouring for action that's going on stage, and but peppered in between this are numbers, and we put these together onto an album to accompany the live show. So we're in the process of doing that, and the album isn't on release yet for this show, but I'd like to play you a clip of one of the singles from that album. This song was written through long improvised sessions. Sam, the drummer, started with this new groove on his electric kit that Alex and I immediately loved. And we messed around with sounds, melodies, harmony, bass line on synths, and we jammed it for a few hours that first day. And the skeleton of the tune was complete from that one rehearsal session. This tune is called Earthquake. And I'm playing just a snippet from about halfway through the piece. So my feeling is that we are all artists, because when we come out, we scribble pictures, you know, we bang drums, it's in our nature. So if you've ever written a poem, made up a song, made up a tune on the guitar or piano, painted a picture, doodled on your bedroom wall, you're an artist. And I imagine that everybody who's listening today has already grasped that fundamentally about themselves to be on this summer school. So we are all artists, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're the artists we want to be just yet. And I always had a drive, or had a want to become a better artist. And I imagine that you're probably in the same boat, where you feel like you have some skill and some competency and some understanding, but that you would like to be a better artist than you currently are. So in my pursuit to become a better artist, and for for the purpose of coming to speak with you today, I collected up some ideas of what I think are the ingredients that we all need to become better artists. So the things I'm going to share with you today, they're very personal ideas that are particular to me, and so some may not be of any use, but hopefully some will be as relevant to you as they are to me. And the first one is to build a trust in yourself and the story or sound that you're making. There's only one me. There's only one you. We each have a completely unique perception of the world. We each have a unique set of gifts and talents, experiences, traumas. So each of us has a unique story to tell. And we each have an experience or combination of experiences that leave their mark on us, that shape us into who we are. And it's this that makes us the artist that we are. It's this that colours the sound we make, the lyrics we write, the stories that we tell. I've been, in my picking through and going through this process of pulling together this collection of ideas, I stumbled across a lot of great artists who give their point of view on something that I'm trying to express, and managing it better sometimes than I can. So I'm going to share with you a clip from an interview with Ricky Lee Jones, who is a brilliant singer-songwriter. All the clips I'm going to be sharing in this session, I'm going to leave so that you can go and find them again afterwards. There'll be a link for you there. So this is Ricky Lee Jones in conversation.
As I keep trying to discover what can't ever be articulated, but have a feeling about it and then feel content that my own goofy personal philosophy, because I think everybody's supposed to have their own. I don't think you're supposed to make yourself conform to somebody else's idea. It's every single voice in the choir, right? And you're given your own set of circumstances, so you can come to your own conclusions about everything. And that's your song in the choir. That's what you're supposed to sing. And we all sing it together, and nobody has to sing that guy's note, right? That's how I feel about all of us.
Harmony.
So we have this unique chemistry of different things that makes us interesting. But we're all human. So we all share this very humbling experience of longing and of fear, and hopefully sometimes of joy. And we all worry sometimes that we're not enough, or don't have enough, or aren't liked or loved enough. So when we share our vulnerability, audiences will identify with that shared vulnerability, and they'll be fascinated by your distinct way of expressing that vulnerability. So here is Tom York from Radiohead talking about the time that he learnt this valuable lesson of presenting the more difficult parts of yourself for the listener.
There's the influence of, which is not really influence, is the how people may emotionally connect with music I've been involved in, and that is something that part of me is completely mystified why that would be the case, because human beings are really different. So why would it be that what I do connects in that way? And the only answer I ever give to that was, like, I discovered maybe when Radiohead first started making records, I discovered maybe around the bends that the bit I didn't want to show, the vulnerable bit, the bit that would be on stage and be in these situations and just have to deal with it, but didn't want to, the bit that wanted to sing about my own feelings but was scared of what that would... That bit was the bit that mattered. And you could put up a million defenses and different things, but that's what mattered, and that's what people connected with.
There is...
So when I set up Pecho Mama, I knew I wanted to tell a story with songs. So first I needed a story to tell, and I was rooting around for an existing story, maybe of a real life character, I thought, and I knew I wanted to represent a woman who had done something big. Not necessarily something good, but something big. And this story would be the basis for all of my compositions and for the script I would write. And my brother, who is also a musician and a theatre artist, suggested the story of Medea. And I don't know how many of you come across the story of Medea yet, but she's an ancient goddess who's married with 2 kids, and her husband cheats on her with the local princess. And Medea is so furious and upset that she kills the princess, she kills the king, and she kills her own 2 children as an act of revenge, leaving her husband alive to live with this tragedy. And then she flies off in a golden chariot, all smug with herself for her great deeds. And my brother told me this story, and I'm a mum with a husband and 2 kids, so this story absolutely horrified me. And so I was instantly like, yes, this is brilliant, I'm gonna have to do it. So me and my bandmates Sam and Alex, we set about trying to work out how to tell this story. And when we tried to work out who our Medea was going to be, you know, we thought, what if she's a pop celebrity? What if she exists in the present day? What if she's existing in a media frenzy? But after a few weeks of getting together, it dawned on me that I needed to find myself in this story for it to mean anything. So I started to think about what parts of me I could bring to the table. And I went straight to the difficult parts. And one of the things that I've struggled with most as an adult is the expectations and demands of domestic motherhood. Being tied to the kitchen, to the house, not earning as much as my husband could, so having to stay home whilst he worked, not having friends around me when I had small children. I felt very alone and very isolated. And I lost my creativity because I was always tired and in demand and pretty low through that time. So I put all this on the table, and that's who my Medea became. The character that I took on and I embodied was a struggling mum who felt unlike everyone else around her, a misfit like me. And that's when everything started to come together. I'm going to play you a piece from the live show of Medea Electronica, which was our first show as a company. And this song comes at the part of the story where Medea begins to lose her grip. She feels like her world is fracturing and she's beginning to have an out-of-body experience. And this song is called Manta Ray.
I am walking up a mountain. It's so hard to keep my feet on earth. When I feel like I spread my wings to see bad things fly away. I've been sleeping forever, but at last I've woken up.
So when I poured myself, my vulnerabilities, my insecurities, my struggles and my experience into the writing and the performing, everything started to click. The lyrics came, the melodies came, and the storyline came. And I learned through that process that in your art, you can't escape yourself. So there's no point in trying. all of our insecurities and dreams, if we throw all of that into our work, then we benefit by cleaning that stuff out from the cupboards of ourselves, but also the audience, the listener, will be compelled to listen, because when someone speaks their truth, we are naturally so interested. I work with a great clown teacher in my discovery of theatre. His name is Philippe Gollier from France. And he teaches the art of bringing yourself to the stage as a performer with all your flaws, as if they're on sale for your audience. But the only way to find success is to bring those weaknesses with absolute delight, to take pleasure in them. And it's a ridiculously difficult balancing act to bring all the pleasure and gratitude of living along with all your insecurities and flaws to the table at the same time. It's almost an impossible chemistry. Being an artist is a ridiculous balancing act of confidence and self-doubt. And here's old Brucey Springsteen summing it up. Let me share my screen again.
Rumble, young musicians, rumble. Open your ears and open your hearts. Don't take yourself too seriously, and take yourself as seriously as death itself. Don't worry. Worry your ass off. Have ironclad confidence, but doubt. It keeps you awake and alert. It keeps you honest. Be able to keep two completely contradictory ideas alive and well inside of your heart and head at all times. If it doesn't drive you crazy, it will make you strong.
Did that share okay, Aisha? Good, good. Okay. I think we have to trust where we are in our own learning process and trust our creative impulses. It's taken me a lot of practice to take more risk and be more courageous in my search for myself in my work. And it's also very tempting, especially when you're, well, anytime, I was going to say when you're starting out, but I think I still have fallen into this trap of trying to create music, to create sounds to please other people, to get other people to like or respect you. But if you do a study of those artists that have gained enduring respect, you'll find it's those who are generally being true to their own nature. I've got a couple of clips here from two artists who have learned through the process of their work to honour their own unique artistic voice. And first up is Jay-Z.
My first album I made was an album called Reasonable Doubt, which in the small circles was considered the album, like a classic album, like the album for that generation in the voice of, you know, people that were going through similar situations. But it didn't sell massive numbers worldwide, right? It was still very niche. Then my second album, because of, you know, Reasonable Doubt and its lack of commercial success, you know, I tried to make these records that were bigger and will be more popular, which was a failure. Going for that success really messed up that project and, you know, set a bad tone. It was a huge learning lesson for me that if I was going to be successful, I had to be successful with myself. I couldn't be successful doing what other people were doing. I had to do what I believed in and what felt real to me and felt true to me.
And then next up, we've got David Bowie.
Never play to the gallery, I think, but you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. And I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that. And if the other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting. Never play to the gallery.
So the work of creativity, in my mind, it's play. From when we first scribble a drawing or bang our mucky fingers on the piano keys, we're playing. Play is in our nature as human beings. When you were at primary school, you may have been asked to stop playing. And so it's quite easy as we grow up to get out of the practice. But I think if you want to be a better artist, and what I tell myself is that we have to be in practice with play, which means daydreaming. It means trying stuff out. It means being constantly curious. Curiosity is hugely powerful. As soon as we've decided that, oh, I've learnt that, or I don't like classical music, or I don't like death metal, or I don't like playing the violin, we lose a huge amount of our potential and our power. We have to practice being open to the creative ideas that are making themselves available to us. I sometimes have to push myself to be open to let the ideas come through. I'd like to play you this wonderful clip from an interview with filmmaker David Lynch, who has a really interesting, fascinating way of looking at how creative ideas can come to you.
An idea comes, and you see it, and you hear it, and you know it.
How does it come?
It comes like on a TV in your mind.
You know, there's a line I've always loved of Leonard Cohen. He said, if I knew where the good songs came from, I would go there more often.
Absolutely. People, we don't do anything without an idea. So they're beautiful gifts. And I always say, you desiring an idea is like a bait on a hook.
Yeah.
It can pull them in. And if you catch an idea that you love, that's a beautiful, beautiful day. And you write that idea down so you won't forget it. And that idea that you caught might just be a fragment of the whole, whatever it is you're working on, but now you have even more bait. Thinking about that small fragment, that little fish, will bring in more, and they'll come in and they'll hook on, and more come in, and pretty soon you might have a script, or a chair, or a painting, or an idea for a painting.
But they come as in small...
More often than not, small fragments. I like to think of it as in the other room, the puzzle is all together, but they keep flipping in just one piece at a time.
In the other room...
Over there.
In a sense, David, there's always another room somewhere.
That's a beautiful thing to think about.
Let's think about it a bit.
No, you think about it.
So how do we throw out our fishing rod to catch these marvellous ideas that David Lynch is talking about? I had a really helpful, instructful time with Kate Lees, who's a script editor, And she taught me that we have an intuitive brain and an analytical brain. And in order to make ourselves available for these wonderful creative ideas, it can be helpful to switch off your analytical brain. We train our analytical brains to run the ship of ourselves, especially during the schooling years that you're currently in. So in order to give our intuitive brains time to play, we have to give our analytical brains something else to do. We have to kind of send it off to work so it can get out of our way. And the way that I found most helpful to do this is to get on my bike. The logical brain is busy keeping me alive on my bike, and making sure that everyone else around me stays alive as well, whilst my intuitive, playful brain is left free to roam. And this is when I solve puzzles, quite often, of a melody, a lyric, a script, and then I get home, or I record on my phone as soon as I stop my bike and record the little fishy I've caught, and I just have to get in there before my analytical brain starts getting its foot back in the door and wanting to take over and say, oh, well, that's just not possible. We can't possibly have another line there. It goes straight to the verse. And if I'm doing everything I can to be curious and play and be intuitive, and if it's still not happening, the ideas still aren't coming, I remind myself to use the phrase, what if? What if I play this backwards? What if I sang this instead of speaking it? What if my story was told from someone else's perspective? For the show we're making currently, I wanted to set most of the action in a nightclub. And so I began imagining this techno soundscape to go with the show. And when we, the band, started really listening to techno, it seemed impossible for us. We were so used to working with song arrangements, melody, harmony, and none of these things seemed to exist in the techno music we were listening to, at least not in a way that we understood as the musicians that we are. So we became very curious as to how we could make techno without all of our usual ways of making music, but also without turning to computer-generated sounds. What if we cut up our usual go-to sounds into tiny pieces and sampled them? What if we took these little fragments and began to play them in different orders, building them up, breaking them down? What if we didn't allow ourselves to take any pre-programmed computer sounds? What if we played with effects across some of them or others? I'm going to play you an excerpt from the song Medicine from the Oedipus album that was the result of this series of what ifs, the result of the curiosity.
May, I think the volume might be down.
Okay.
On iTunes.
Oh, yes. Yes. There's this notion in our culture that some people are gifted genius, that we have to be really good, and the pressure we put on ourselves to escape mediocrity is a complete creativity killer. Every time we hear someone say, oh, I'll never be as good as David Bowie, so I'll give up now, we lose another creative voice that might have had something weird and wonderful to share with us that we might have been able to delight in. And our culture is so centered on each individual being a product and rateable by likes. And there's a few genius legends that can soar above the rest, leaving us mere mortals in the dust. This is one of the biggest anti-ingredients for creativity. There's an author called Elizabeth Gilbert, who you may have come across, and she's done lots of research into the way that we relate to the part of ourselves that is creative. She's noticed that a lot of people discuss their creativity as something that they struggle with, they're in battle with, sometimes it's painful and traumatic, and she suggests that actually if we remove the idea of our creative self, what some people might refer to as our ego, and all the pressure that accompanies that, then we open ourselves up to this enjoyable and productive relationship with our creativity. So I'm going to give us now a clip from Elizabeth Gilbert on her talk, her TED Talk on genius.
Risks of creativity, and that search has led me to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So stay with me because it does circle around back. But ancient Greece and ancient Rome, people did not happen to believe that creativity came from human beings back then, okay? People believed that creativity was this divine attendant spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons. The Greeks famously called these divine attendant spirits of creativity daemons. Socrates famously believed that he had a daemon who spoke wisdom to him from afar. The Romans had the same idea, but they called that sort of disembodied creative spirit a genius, which is great, because the Romans did not actually think that a genius was a particularly clever individual. They believed that a genius was this sort of magical divine entity who was believed to literally live in the walls of an artist's studio, kind of like Dobby, the house elf, and who would come out and sort of invisibly assist the artist with their work and would shape the outcome of that work. So brilliant. There it is, right there, that distance that I'm talking about, that psychological construct.
Another thing that my training with Philippe Gaudier taught me was that mistakes are golden. Rather than being full of fear of getting something wrong in performance or in collaboration or with tech doing a masterclass, we can actually celebrate the moment that we deviate from the correct path, the correct voicing, the correct notes in a scale. If something goes wrong, don't immediately throw it out. Listen again. Brian Eno, the musician, uses the mantra, honor thy error as a hidden intention. And maybe if your genius house guest who's come to visit you has been playing with you, then you'll see something within an error that you make or a mistake that you make, which is actually brilliant and fresh and worth pursuing. So the next ingredient I want to share with you is a fun one. It's collaboration. Collaboration is a learned skill, I think. Unlike play, which is what we come with naturally, that curiosity, collaboration, when you watch very young children playing, I see that it doesn't come naturally to us. We want to hit each other over the head with our toy truck if someone plays with our favorite doll. So learning to collaborate with other human beings, other artists, takes time and patience and generosity. One very important lesson I've learned is that in order to have a good collaboration, you have to choose your collaborators wisely. A year before I set up Pecho Mama, I'd been reading a book by Clarissa Pinkola Estes about the things we can learn from fairy tales. And in it, she talks about hombre con pechos, which is Spanish and translates roughly as men with boobs. And she writes, these human beings could be called little wild mothers, the ones who reattach you to the wildest instincts, rejoicing when they see you coming back with the fiery skull held out before you. These little wild mothers, these men with boobs, these are the ones that I think we should be seeking out to collaborate with. If you begin collaborating with people who you are in awe of, or who misunderstand you, that you have difficult chemistry with, it doesn't produce good results. So I seek out and spend time with those people who are in my life, my little wild mothers, and it usually goes without saying that I am their little wild mother too, because we both feel this thing together as a chemistry. The little wild mothers are the people in your life who give you a knowing smile when you're taking a risk on being yourself. They're the ones that can look you in the eye and you know that they get you. And you're very lucky if you find these people, and it can take some time. And it helps in the pursuit of finding these people if you've been practicing the previous ingredients that I put in the pot: trust in yourself, curiosity, play. If you believe that you've got something worth sharing and you take delight in yourself and in your work, then it's like honey for the bees. All the bees are going to be coming around your honey pot, and you'll find your little wild mothers. Whatever your wild ideas are, your moments of creative chaos, your hombres con pechos see you, being you, and they delight in it. But it's not just about what they can bring to you. Collaborating takes generosity. We have to be the little wild mothers for others. We have to applaud the people that we see being brave in risking themselves. And if you start making work together with someone, it's really important to learn, and it takes time. I'm still learning it, the generosity of spirit, to really listen when someone's trying out a new idea, a riff or a lyric or an arrangement. Even if at first you feel like their idea is not so hot, or that they've dismissed your idea too quickly, give yourself to their idea fully, and in that way you can honour them. And if you cultivate that generosity in the rehearsal room, then you'll soon find that you're surpassing your expectations and making something better than your individual ideas. I'm noticing that I'm running out of time, and I have so much more to tell you all about, so I'm just going to have to pick ahead. And jump to the ingredient of the ways that we practice collaboration. So when we started rehearsing, we wanted to find a new shared language. So we tried all sorts of exercises, and one of the tools that really ignited a new way of collaborating together for us was Indian conical. With the three of us have got very different skill sets as musicians, but conical was fairly new to all of us, so it was a great thing to come into together. It's the South Indian rhythmic pattern that's really different from our Western 4/4 that we're very used to, and it's a brilliant tool for breaking you and your musical collaborators out of fixed patterns. So the idea with conical is that they give words to collections of beats. So instead of one, it's ta. Instead of two, it's taka. Instead of three, it's takita. Instead of four, it's takadimi. And instead of five, it's tadigenaka. These are some versions. They have many versions. These are the ones that we use. And we have not become masters of this art in the slightest, but it's a wonderful tool for us to get into the collaborative zone together. I wanted to play you some conical masters at work together, but I'm just going to put them in the comment section because I'm running out of time. When we were writing the music for Oedipus, we were trying to pin things down before we went into the studio, and we were really struggling with the piece of music that we needed for this huge, awful, good soundtrack, tragic climax in the show. And we had the name Dark Star, and we had a few lyrics from an early jam, and we each had our own ideas for this song. And when we rehearsed, we each liked something that the other two of us didn't like so much. And we rehearsed this tune so many different ways. It had all of our ideas all jostling around. There were samples of my daughter singing some Hebrew she'd done at school, and there was this weird Bon Jovi melody rip-off and this strange middle eight, and we couldn't resolve it, but we were due to go and record it, and we'd run out of time to create it. So we had to walk into the studio and put it down, and we listened back to it, and we realized that none of us liked it. It wasn't truly collaborative. It was kind of a patchwork of each of us rather than an expression of our collaboration. So we were a little bit worried, and we went out into the night, and we were in France, so we drank a fair bit of red wine, and we talked and we talked. We talked about the song and what it was supposed to be representing in the show, this moment where all hope has gone and the characters are feeling so much regret they don't want to carry on living. And we talked about the feeling that we were trying to evoke and the bands that evoke that feeling in us. And we realized that these bands were bands that just played together constantly. And they were bands from the 70s playing progressive rock before computers were available to all of us, so that we could produce and polish everything as it was being created. So it's something very raw. So we made a pact that night that we stuck to the next day, that we'd go into the recording studio in the morning, and that we wouldn't talk, we wouldn't discuss, but we'd make a brand new piece of music together. We didn't know what the arrangement was going to be, we didn't know what key it was going to be, and we didn't know the tempo. We just decided to trust all of the playing and listening that we'd done together. And I think this means that this is going to be the last excerpt I get to share with you now. The tune is called Dark Star. And then, I know I'm pushing time, but I'm going to just play a little, I'm going to finish off with some words from Patti Smith. So this is Dark Star from the new album that we're doing, Oedipus Electronica, and then just a quick excerpt of Patti Smith, and then I think we'll be in time for a Q&A. Over to Patti.
To be an artist, actually to be a human being in these times, it's all difficult. You have to go through life, hopefully, you know, trying to stay healthy, you know, being as happy as you can, and pursuing, you know, doing what you want. If what you want is to have children, if what you want is to be a baker, if what you want is to live out in the woods or try to save the environment, or maybe what you want is to write scripts for detective shows. It doesn't really matter, you know. What matters is to know what you want and pursue it, and understand that it's going to be hard, because life is really difficult. You're going to lose people you love. You're going to suffer heartbreak. Sometimes you'll be sick. Sometimes you'll have a really bad toothache. Sometimes you'll be hungry. But on the other end, you'll have the most beautiful experiences. Sometimes just the sky. Sometimes, a piece of work that you do that feels so wonderful, or you find somebody to love, or your children, or there's beautiful things in life. So when you're suffering, just, it's part of the package,
Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Mella. Thank you, Patty, and thank you for all the inspirations you brought to us today. It was really valuable to hear you talk so openly and insightfully, Mella. Thank you very much. We're really lucky to have you join us today. Now is we've got 6-7 minutes for the Q&A session. So thank you for those who's already popped their questions in the Q&A kind of box. If there is more, please put them in there. But I'll begin with one that was posted just earlier on in the session. So it was an anonymous attendee asking, how do you add variation to your pieces so that they are not repetitive?
It's not an effort to do that, because I think what makes that really easy to take on in the current outfit with Pecho Mama is that we have a story, and the story takes you through conflict resolution, and the essence of the story is that you follow a character or a couple of characters go through a great transformation. And so when we're writing music for the show, we're writing a song that tells a place of inertia, and then we're telling a song that is pulling away from that inertia, and then we've got to find a song that expresses all the confusion of the beginning of the journey, and then we've got to find the song that's the quiet moment of contemplation, then we have to find the song that's the tragic climax, and then we have to find the song of the resolution. So the job of writing songs for stories is got a wonderful creative limitation. We have to express this part of a journey that must transform and it must change. So we have to look in ourselves for that. And then the result is hopefully that we have a bunch of very different songs and very different sounds that express those different places. That doesn't mean I'm not, I don't fall foul to, we listen to a couple of songs, we're like, same tempo, same key, we need to break out of it. But I think that story structure really is a gift in that way.
That's great. We've got another question wondering, do you ever start up your digital audio workstation and create from having no ideas?
Yeah, all the time. All the time. I mean, when I say digital workstation, it's I use hardware. I'm rubbish with software. So I have a monologue, a Korg monologue, which is a small, very bassy synth that just plays one note at a time. You can't play chords on it, which has got a great creative limitation in that. And then I've got the vocal effects unit, the TC Helicon Voice Live 3, which you can do an enormous amount. You can add a choir to your voice. So they're brilliant toys. So it's very easy for me just to turn them on and have fun with them. And if I turn them on in the house and start having fun with them, then everybody wants to come in, and soon I'm having to give up the mic for somebody else to come and have a play because they're so ridiculously fun to play with. And another good fun thing I've started doing through lockdown is that Sam, the drummer, will send me just drum tracks, and that will be sort of a starting point for some inspiration for playing around with.
That's really interesting. We've got a question from Wato, and we kind of have a few more minutes, so I'll just maybe bring up 2 questions. So it starts with a comment saying, I went to see Media Electronica at Fringe last year and absolutely loved it, ! Can't wait to see Oedipus. I just wanted to ask, would you call your work geek theatre? And whether or not you do, what does gig theatre mean to you? How would you define it? I think this was a question that was kind of forming at the back of my mind too. So it would be great to perhaps hear more about how you define that practice that you've been developing. And after that, we might have a question, maybe time for another one, but otherwise, yeah.
Okay, I'll try and be brief on that one. Thank you for coming to see us and support us at the Fringe. Yeah, from early on, it was the easiest genre to fit it into because there was this upcoming thing of gig theatre. When I started talking to PR people about how to sell the show, I was warned off gig theatre because there's what had happened in the theatre industry is that theatre had started to want to bring in some kind of live music element to make these kind of experimental music driven pieces, but that quite often the actors were more accomplished actors than they were musicians. And so unfortunately it had a little bit of a bad rep around it, that the music wasn't necessarily up to a great standard. And we'd come at it from the angle of being primarily musicians. The other two members of the company are musicians, not actors, and I was just beginning to explore acting. So we're still trying to work it out is the answer. Live concept album is one that I like, but it's quite often, I'm told it's a little bit too ambiguous and people need something a bit clearer. So we need someone to come up with a better word for it. So if you can work it out, let me know. Have we got time for one more, Aisha?
We don't, but we have I think I have a solution for it, which is it was coming up earlier in the Q&A box as well. People were wondering whether you were going to share the links with them. So I told them we will share them after the session. And the last question was, besides your own life, what inspires your storylines and music? So maybe if you would like to think of some links, maybe we can answer that question with follow-up links that everyone can get. But yeah, otherwise I think this is the end of our session, unfortunately. But thank you for everyone for coming today and for their questions. We hope you all enjoyed this masterclass double session with both Mella and David earlier as much as I did. And we would love to know what you enjoyed most about this session and how else sound and music can support young composers and music creators. So we will be writing to you soon with a short online questionnaire as well as the links that Mella wanted to share, but also David's script to make sure that everyone also has that. If you'd like to find out more about our events, including the masterclasses happening this week until Friday, every day at 1 p.m, educational opportunities and programs, please visit our website www.soundandmusic.org. We would also like to say a special thank you to our founders. It's a bit long, but bear with me. Arts Council England, Lucille Graham Trust, Boris Karloff Charitable Foundation, Bliss Trust, Samuel Gardner Memorial Trust, Finzi Trust, Radcliffe Trust, Three Monkeys, Marches Trust, the Estate of Margaret Angering, Doyley Cart Charitable Trust, and lastly, if you can or know anyone who does want to support our work by making a donation, you can again find more information on our website. Otherwise, a huge thanks to Mella, David, and for those of you who joined us today, and hope you enjoyed the rest of your days and maybe see you again in another masterclass this week. Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.